Welcome to the 265th of the COVID calls. This is a daily discussion of the COVID-19 pandemic with a diverse collection of disaster experts. My name is Scott Gabriel Knowles. I'm a historian of disasters at the Korea Advanced Institute of Science and Technology. I'm coming to you live from Daejeon, South Korea. Today is a discussion of the Asian diaspora in the COVID crisis with Woo-jae Kim and Jinri Kim. Just a reminder, you can catch COVID calls live most weekdays at 5:30 p.m. Eastern Time, as well as many Fridays at 5:30 p.m. Korea time on YouTube. Just go to the COVID Calls YouTube channel to watch. You can hear COVID calls anytime recorded as podcasts on Spotify, iTunes, Podbean, or anywhere you get podcasts. You can also keep up with COVID calls via Twitter using the handle @USOFDisaster or @COVID calls. Please help spread the word and send suggestions for future guests and future topics. Please feel free to suggest yourself as a future guest. As of today, April 23rd, 2021, there are 3,071,834 deaths from COVID-19 globally. That's according to the Johns Hopkins University Coronavirus Resource Center. The death toll in South Korea right now stands at 1,808 lives lost from COVID-19. In France, 102,164 people have died from COVID-19. As a way to bring some humanity to the numbers, I've been reading a life story or a story of advocacy for those impacted by the pandemic, and I'd like to continue that now. The headline is, "Death Tolls Show France's Immigrants Hardest Hit by COVID-19 Study Finds." This was written by Anne Deandra Luarn and published on July 17, 2020 on infomigrants.net. Are immigrants more vulnerable to coronavirus? A study by the Paris-based INSEE, the National Institute of Statistics and Economic Studies, published July 7, 2020, revealed that the mortality rate at the height of the COVID-19 crisis in France among foreign-born nationals and foreign-born residents, increased more than twice as much as the rate for those born in France. In the early days of the pandemic in March and April of 2020, 129,000 people died from all causes compared to 102,800 at the same time last year, an increase of 25% attributed to the pandemic. At the same time, deaths of foreign-borns rose from 22% in 2019 to 48% in 2020. The high death rate among these groups can be explained in part by the fact that immigrant populations in France tend to settle in poorer, more densely populated areas, especially in the Paris metropolitan area of Île-de-France, home to impoverished banlieues or suburbs. For people born in France and living in a densely populated commune, deaths between March 1st and April 30th of 2020 increased by 39% compared to the same period in 2019, the study noted. This rate jumped by 76% for North Africans and 158% for sub-Saharan Africans because of their overrepresentation in this type of municipality in Île-de-France as in other regions, the study found. The case of the northern Parisian suburb of Seine-Saint-Denis, where many immigrants live in underprivileged neighborhoods, perfectly illustrates the trend. The mortality rate between spring of 2019 and 20 increased by 95% among people born in France, but by 191% for those from North Africa, and a massive 368% for those born in sub-Saharan Africa. The collection of so-called ethnic statistics is prohibited in France since the French Republic is officially colorblind, refusing to categorize or count people by race or ethnicity. It may, however, be authorized on a case-by-case basis, particularly for scientific purposes such as the study carried out by INSEE. Minority rights activists have long believed that the absence of ethnic statistics has made the French state blind to the problem of racism and discrimination. Mounting evidence from the United States, Britain, and Canada pointing to greater COVID-19 mortality risks for non-white groups increased pressure on French researchers to do the same. While the study pointing to high death rates among their foreign-born parents suggests that minorities, especially from sub-Saharan African groups, were disproportionately affected by the pandemic, it shed no light on the situation among French-born children of immigrants. The researchers, though, the use of available data showed valuable findings. France doesn't do ethnic racial statistics, but we have the country of birth, said Sylvie Lemonez, head of INSEE's Department of Demographic Studies. That is already very, very illuminating. Okay, I'd like to turn to my conversation for today and let me introduce my guests to you. Jinri Kim holds a master's in public policy and specializes in social policy and social innovation. She's a foreign research correspondent at the Korea Institute for Health and Social Affairs, writes articles on France's social policy issues in the journal Global Social Security Review. Jinri wrote a master's thesis titled Intimate Stranger, a study of Filipino domestic workers in France. She's also co-founder of a home food waste app called Empty My Fridge. My second guest is Dr. Woo-jae Kim. Woo-jae is a geneticist. He's interested in social insects such as honeybees and ants. He holds a bachelor's degree in biology from Yonsei University in Korea. He received a master's and PhD degree in molecular virology at Postech. While doing postdoctoral research in the United States, he started to do research on Drosophila, behavioral genetics, fruit flies. He was previously in Ottawa University, a university in Ottawa, and is currently at Harbin Institute of Technology in China, researching molecular mechanisms of social behaviors and neurocircuits. He's also the author of several books, including Fly Room and Selected Nature, and a book called Woo-jae Kim, Prize the Private Life of Drosophila. So let me welcome my guests, Jinri Kim and Woo-jae Kim. Thank you so much for joining me on COVID Calls today.
Hello.
Hi, nice to meet you.
So I'd like to start the way I usually do, just find out where you're calling in from and what the pandemic situation is looking like there today. Jinri, can I begin with you, please?
Yes, of course. Oh yeah. So now actually I am in South Korea. I arrived here last 9th of April, and now I'm doing the mandatory quarantine that every people who come to Korea have to do. And otherwise, I live in Paris. And the situation of Paris about COVID is not improving very well. So as you already mentioned, there are 100,000 deaths. They passed 100,000 deaths like almost a week ago, and they're doing third lockdown. So when I was in Paris, we were doing third lockdown. It wasn't as strict as last two lockdown that we did last year, but shops and restaurants are closed. Yeah.
Did you have access to vaccination there in Paris? Is that something that people are able to do at this time?
Well, actually, they did start vaccination last December 27th of December 2020, but they had lots of trouble because vaccination was very slow at the beginning, and lots of criticism about organization of vaccination happened. But when I checked out the statistic, April 18th, now 18% of the population received at least one dose of COVID-19 19 vaccine. But I would say that actually one of the reason what is really tricky about France is that France is one of the most vaccine skeptical countries in the world. Actually, according to the recent survey, 42% of French people answered that they would not take the vaccine, and 21% were unsure about whether to have it. So I would say that it's not only about the organization of vaccination, but it's also that people are quite reluctant to get vaccinated, which is slowing down the rollout of vaccination in France compared to the other European countries.
It's such a remarkable insight and statistic. I didn't realize. I knew that there was more vaccine hesitancy in France than other countries, but I didn't realize it was quite that high. Maybe we'll touch on that more later. And just one more question for you as we're starting, Jinri. So you're just finishing up the quarantine. How have you found that experience to be?
Well, actually, I didn't find it very complicated because of I think it's because of my personality that I am very home person. I like to stay at home, but the thing is that I also did lockdown twice already in France, which was quite strict last year. So of course during the lockdown you can go out to go to supermarkets, but during the quarantine you can't really go out. But I think um it's not as complicated as people might think. And I'm also quite excited because, as I already mentioned, in France now shops and restaurants are all closed. But tomorrow I will be able to go to restaurant or go to cafes. So, I think this quarantine is actually worth it for me to respect. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you for sharing that, and enjoy your freedom tomorrow. And welcome back to South Korea. Woo-jae, let me turn to you now. Same question. Where are you calling from, and what's the pandemic situation there?
So I'm in Harbin, China. Is the northeast side of the China, and yeah, here, if you walk the street, about 60 to 70% people don't wear the mask. Means that we are now free from the COVID. So people eat together, and all the restaurant open, so you can go anywhere inside the China. And so if you come inside the China, then you will feel that there's no corona, COVID-19. So this is maybe the only country like that. And actually, when the COVID-19 started last year, about February and March, I was in Korea and in Daejeon, the same place like Scott in the KRIBB as the invited scientist. And I was supposed to work from the March or the August in Harbin, but I had to delay the starting date because of the COVID-19. So I waited about 9 months to come here. And during that time, I went to Canada because my wife and daughter lives there. So I went to Canada and I experienced the Canada quarantine. And I come back to Korea, so I experienced the Korean quarantine. And to come to China, I had to be in a hotel for 28 days. So I know 3 countries for quarantine days. So, but yeah, I was okay. I was like Jilly, so I like at home. So quarantine for me was very happy days. So I watched the drama. I just read some papers. Yeah, I was okay, except the food. Except the food. The food in the Chinese hotel was not that good. So yeah, except that I was okay.
I had a previous COVID Calls episode where I had guests who were able to talk about the experience comparing South Korea and China. Aram Jong was my guest for that, and Yeonsil Kang, as well as Hilda Vanderbilt, who was a colleague of mine in the United States, and she described her situation in Europe where there was no quarantine. It was sort of like a self-enforced kind of self-monitoring kind of thing, and that compared to the South Korean and the Chinese case. Couldn't it be more different? Can it just, if you wouldn't mind saying just a little bit more, Woo-jae, what was the Canadian quarantine like?
So Canadian quarantine is not strict. So they just let you go home, and
Right.
it's up to you. You just be there 14 days, and they just don't want you go out, but nobody watch you. They just call every day like 3 to 4 p.m. But that's it. So they don't have any app. They don't have any. They have app, but they don't use it. But Korean quarantine is very strict. You cannot go out. Yeah.
When I did the quarantine here with my family, and the daily temperature checks They're not messing around with that.
Yeah.
If you don't get that in on time, you're going to get a message. They're going to want that
Yeah.
information. So I found that very interesting. Well, fascinating to hear those reports from both of you. Thanks a lot for that. Our topic today is we're going to be talking about some of the difficult issues. I've talked with other guests on COVID calls about anti-Asian violence and bias that has emerged around the world in the context of this pandemic. And I'd like to start actually, Woo-jae, in addition to being a scientist, you're a very prolific writer, and you wrote a opinion piece which I found in the Hankyoreh newspaper here in South Korea. You published this on April 6th under the headline, "Again, Yellow Peril." I'm just going to read a quote from it and ask you why you wrote this piece. You wrote, "No politician is going to defend racist violations of human rights at a surface level. But when a society has been thrown into disorder by war or plague, state authorities may always opt to use racism as a means of staying in power." That's a strong statement, and it's a really brilliant opinion piece, and I hope people will read it, and I'll share it again on Twitter. Why did you write this opinion piece?
Okay, so before I wrote this the column, there was an accident in the United States. One Caucasian male killed a lot of Asian women. I forgot which state. It was Georgia. I don't know, Atlanta something. So after that, I saw that and I heard a lot of the news, and I heard a lot of the report from my friend too. They said when they go out nowadays, especially Asians, they feel something weird. Before it's quite different from before COVID-19. So they feel danger, you know, in the United States when they go out. Even someone who lives in New York, she's told me that she's now feels safe during this pandemic. So, and my wife lives in Ottawa, the capital of Canada. And then my wife, she was worrying too, this Asian hate. So I was searching some papers and news, and then I found Jilly's paper. It published last year something. So I was very surprised that she described all the historical perspective of this yellow peril. So actually, frankly speaking, I didn't know that the word yellow peril before I read the Jilly's paper. Then after I read the Jilly's paper, I studied by myself about this historical, very interesting phenomena, and I realized that it connected to the eugenics like Nazis and things like that, right? And I'm a geneticist, so I'm very interested in the history of the eugenics too, because that was tragedy in humankind. So I connected, so I made a column. So, and I personally very angry about this phenomenon because this is not fault of Asian. This pandemic, there's no fault for anyone. So why they blame the Asian, right? So actually, that writing is very suppressed of my anger, but that was the reason I wrote that. Yeah, thank you.
Well, it comes through very strong, and it's the kind of thing that we've seen expressed in American newspapers. But I haven't seen. I'm a newcomer to South Korea, and I was interested to see that in the South Korean newspaper as well. So we'll talk more about that. I want to bring Jinri into the conversation, especially as which is pointing out that he reached out to you to read your work. So talk to us a little bit about your research, and particularly this concept of yellow peril.
Okay. So yeah, I'm very happy first of all that the Professor Woo-jae Kim found my article interesting. And the reason is quite similar. The reason that I wrote this article is quite similar to Woo-jae's reason that I got very interested in the phenomenon that racism against Asian became much more visible in French society with the pandemic, whereas it wasn't considered to be a social problem before the pandemic. But as an Asian who is living in France, I always wanted to show that racism against Asian has been existed all the time, but maybe in different forms. And the pandemic was just a catalyst that made it very visible. So I wanted to understand the reason why racism against Asian was so vandalized in the society. So in my article, I studied how Asians have been racialized, focusing on the French society. And I talked about two opposing stereotypes of Asian, which are, again, the model minority and the yellow pearl. So can I start talking about the model minority? Because I think that if I want to talk about the yellow pearl, it's important to talk about the model minority first.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, so modern minorities term that was firstly used in the States. It was used to describe Asian Americans as hardworking, successful, and low-bidding ethnic minority that has overcome hardship and discrimination. And French scholars argue that these images of Asian described as the modern minority is also applied in French society, that in France, Asian people are also perceived as hardworking, diligent, and those who do not make troubles. So, but I found this modern minority stereotypes very tricky because they're seemingly positive. Those stereotypes are often described as positive and even valorizing, although it is obviously an act of racialization. So at first sight, it seems harmless, or rather advantageous for Asian people to find jobs or in their daily lives. But the problem is that even though they seem to be positive, it's a process. It's a process of essentialization, putting them in a certain category, ignoring that all individual Asians have different cultural background, different personalities, and etc. So, and also another problem, essentialization, is that it is followed by othering Asian people, making a clear line between us and them, as well as creating a hierarchy between us and them. So, so that this modern minority stereotype fascinated me because, again, I thought that one of the reasons that Asian racism against Asian is so banalized in French society is because these positive positive stereotypes have been considered to be harmless. So, for example, being an Asian in France, you get lots of racist remarks and racial attitudes, and people were easily and these are easily tolerated and banalized in this society. And I found it really ironic that French people in general, very much aware of racism against other minorities, but when they talk about racism against Asian, there's still lots of people who believe that there's no such thing. So before the COVID, racism against Asian were expressed in a subtle way, and it was often disguised as joke or humor. And as a victim, it made it very difficult to point out and complain about it because you're not really sure whether he or she, was doing this to harm you. Even if you know that, it was very difficult for me to find to point it out because in the society we believe that racism against Asian doesn't exist. And then with the COVID-19, not only this belief that racism against Asian is harmless was proven totally wrong, and all of a sudden we've observed that all the dominant discourse of Asians being more than minority just vanished. And instead, people start treating us as a threat or calling us dog eater, implying Asian culture being uncivilized or barbaric. So those similarly positive images of Asians just flipped to the very negative images. And then I found this phenomenon very interesting. And in this respect, actually, many researchers have pointed out that stereotypes are ambivalent as they contain contradictory messages simultaneously. So, for example, a scholar, Liam Kerrigan, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing his name properly, but he argues that one same threat of a minority group could be perceived and described both in positive and negative way, according to the people's point of view and dominant discourse of the society. So, for example, as I already mentioned, that before the COVID, Asian people were praised as more than minority, but in the 20th century, the representation of Asian people were rather negative, as they were described as like mysterious, closed, and cunning. And then the yellow peril was a dominant discourse about Asians.
Let me just pause you there for a second, and thank you for going into that detail. And let me just bring Wu-Jie back in and see if he wanted to comment on any of that. And particularly, if you don't mind me asking this personal question, but I mean, if you both, Jinri, you shared that you felt that you had experienced this stereotype yourself.
Well, yeah.
And Wu-Jie, does that resonate with you as something you've experienced in your life as well, as a person who's worked and lived, as you said, in Canada and also in the United States?
Yes, I think most of Asian experience this. So can I ask you, Scott, in Korea, do you get any kind of discrimination from Korean people? Do you feel it?
Not at all.
You don't, right? Well, we do. We do in the United States. We do in Canada, in French. So, for example, like especially women, women and old, they got discrimination a lot. So I think most of them experience that. For example, like in California, I was in California. California is okay. If you go like the middle of the Middle East of the United States, you easily can feel it in like just in like just restaurant or when you buy something, you have to feel that kind of feeling of people watching you. And my wife, after COVID-19, when she went to Costco, she heard twice that you Chinese go back to your country, even she was Korean, So one thing I want to point out the Geely thing is this Asian period this time is very specialized to China, not the other country. Yeah, they believe that this COVID-19 started from Wuhan, right? So that is true. So they blame China for that. So if you go Canada, actually, do you know Canada, right? Canada is very, they don't like racism. So in surface. So if you go Canada, you feel a little bit different from United States, especially to Asian. But after COVID-19, the place where I live, my wife told me that she feels like she's discriminated by the Caucasian people. Especially that's why she doesn't like to go out like Costco and some supermarket, right? And this is especially very cruel to Asian women and the old people. So that's why I was very angry about it. And this thing, so Scott, you're the only Caucasian, right? So I will tell you this. If you don't experience this, you cannot tell this. If you never get discriminated by your whole neighbor, right? In this way, you cannot tell this. So it's really hard to feel this way as Asian, And after COVID-19, it's getting more serious. That's why Geely called it period, right? It's yellow period now. Yeah. And now I'm China, right? And even I'm feeling this very similar the environment from Korean people too. You know, Korean people also hate Chinese people. So that's what I'm saying. Really, if you want to research more, you need to research about this is very specialized to China, not the other Asian country. So it's not more, it's like Chinese parrot, not yellow parrot. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yep. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that. And just to bring it back, because it's something that Wu Jie said, Jinri, I wanted to get your opinion about. You know, I was speaking recently with Jaewon Hyun and Young-Sub Choi, and we were talking about face mask use and the history of that across Asia, in many different parts of Asia, Singapore and Taiwan and Korea and China. But the way that that has been written about in the West is that it's just an Asian phenomena. And Wu Jie was pointing out there's nuances. I mean, to talk about Asia is like talking about Africa or talking about Europe or talking about North America. But you know, it's so abstract almost as to be meaningless. And I wonder how that sort of fits in with this model minority discussion and the way it works. Does it ever get more nuanced than just to say Asian, or does it actually work differently depending on what countries people might be from? These stereotypes vary based on if someone is from Japan or Korea, for example, or China or Singapore.
I think when they refer to the modern minority, they typically refer to East Asian people who have kind of cultural background of Confucianism, who really value the education and success in the success, your own success in your career. But if I talk about my own experience, I clearly see the difference before the COVID and after the COVID. Before the COVID, as I already mentioned, racial stereotypes against Asian was very nuanced and also very subtle. So I couldn't really. Sometimes I felt very uncomfortable with some racist comment, but I didn't find the language to talk about it because no one told me that it was racist, and because I start convincing myself that okay, what this person said wasn't to attack me, but it was kind of compliment, even though I feel very uncomfortable with it. And so that was a struggle that even if you talk about it, people don't try to believe you, or people try to tell you that it wasn't actually racist. And what I now realize is that for example, when someone says something quite rather offensive, for example, like "Qing Qing Zhong" or "Ni hao" is like a, you hear this in daily basis in French. And when you talk about this to your friends could tell you that, oh, but those people ignorant, so those people ignorant, so you shouldn't waste your energy about
Right.
about these people. But what I realized is that actually being able to ignorant about whether I'm from Korea, whether I'm from China, is also power, an expression of power, because for them, making an effort of knowing about that Asia consists of many countries
Right.
is unimportant. It doesn't give any importance to them. And after the COVID, and what I remember is that at the beginning of 2020, I took a metro, and I saw the people starting covering their nose and mouth, and I felt very uncomfortable because I really felt like, okay, I'm a potential virus now here. So from that experience, since that day, I did not take a metro for such a long time because I did not want to feel uncomfortable. So I was lucky enough that I didn't have any physical violence attacked against me, but these little subtle things makes you feel very intimidated, and as Uza said, you don't want to go out from your house anymore because you're constantly conscious about any offense that could happen to you. And one more thing, if I can add, is that actually in France, what was really interesting is that at the beginning of COVID, the government said to the people that wearing mask is not effective way to prevent virus, and they even said that wearing mask not correctly is worse than not wearing mask at
Right.
all.
Right.
So in that situation, I wearing mask being an Asian was completely a symbol of being a virus. So when my mom called me from Korea and saying, "Oh, you need to wear a mask," I kept saying that, you know what, I'm not going to wear because I don't want to be discriminated. So I almost risked my life not to be discriminated in the French society.
So what you're both describing coincides very well with a call I had earlier this week with Mira Choi and Hannah Tesler, who are two sociologists at Yale University, and they're studying these phenomena as well. And they point out that all of this is it's hard to document. It leads to exhaustion and stress, and also many times people. It's back to what you were saying, Jay, and what you were just describing, Jinri, that when you're experiencing it, many times immigrants, if they're moving to a country permanently, or even if they're there for a short time, they don't yet understand frame of reference for humor. And so if somebody says to them, "Oh, that's just a joke, don't worry about that,"
Yeah.
they may not have a basis to really know if that's true or not. And additionally, they probably are in those countries because they want to believe the best things about Canada or the United States or France. And so they may actually be predisposed to doubt themselves in that moment because they've taken a leap to leave their home country, South Korea or China, and go and try and work in those places. Those are levels and nuances to that they're pointing out in their research, they're finding in interviews they're doing in the United States right now. I just want to remind folks you're listening to COVID Calls, and I'm talking to Woo-jae Kim and Jinri Kim today about racism and bias against the Asians in the Asian diaspora in COVID. We should turn our conversation now to talk a bit more about this yellow peril concept. It was central to the opinion piece that Woo-jae wrote and also to your research, Jinri. Let me ask you first if you'd say a little bit more about this historical grounding, and then Woo-jae, I'll bring you back in.
Okay, so I think I started from introducing a modern minority. So now, just briefly saying that what I said was that yellow minority and the modern minority and the yellow fever are closely related to each other, even though they look quite opposing to each other. So if I can briefly introduce the definition of yellow peril is that it's the belief that East Asians pose an inherent threat to white Western power, values, social order, and culture. And this term yellow peril was firstly used by Emperor Wilhelm II of Germany in 1895 when Europe witnessed Japan's advanced military capacity and economic progress as they won Sino-Japanese War and Russo-Japanese War. So they feared Japan becoming a dominant power, overtaking white European nations. But this yellow peril myth has been reproduced in Western media continuously, even when the dominant discourse of Asian was the modern minority. And in the 2000s, with China gaining more and more power in the global economy and politics, the yellow fever discourse started appearing more often. Since I'm living in France, I studied about the French case that actually in 2015 there was a cover of the magazine called Fluide Glacial. They put the illustration of China occupying Paris with the title Yellow Peril. What if it's already too late? So I prepared the illustration to share with you guys that sorry, I'm struggling. Yeah.
no problem. Okay, we can.
Can you guys?
Okay, fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can see it. We can see it.
Oh, I don't think
It's
I'm
wrong.
showing the
Yeah,
right
it
one.
should be.
That's some text.
You
It looks
should
like.
put. Yeah, put the PowerPoint in the browser. Yeah, location.
I'm sorry. I don't understand why I'm showing a different one, even if I choose the. Can I try it again? I'm sorry.
No problem. Take your time.
Yeah. Oh,
Okay. So now is it?
Anyway.
Yeah. So
okay, we can see it.
Yeah,
so
it looks
this
very good.
So this is the illustration that I talked about, that I just mentioned about. That sorry. Yeah, this is the illustration, and what is really interesting is that they applied completely the narrative of Yellow Peril. So in the first cover, they put Peril jaune, si c'était déjà trop tard. It means again that Yellow Peril, what if it's already too late? And they put this imagination that China occupying Paris. And the second cover, what is really interesting is that they describe Chinese people's hands as animal-like with long nails, while European and Arab hands as human-like. So by doing so, the illustration used the dichotomy of animal versus human or uncivilized versus civilized, making the Chinese and also Asians as an inferior other. And by othering Asians, they also dehumanize Asian people, again, by describing their hands more animal-like. And in the first cover, what is also quite interesting is that there's a white guy carrying the wagon, and it shows clearly the feeling of dread the Western countries, in this case France, feels from the rise of Chinese power in the international order. And at the same time, what is very weird is that they put the image of wagon, kind of implying that China still use wagon than a car. So they at the same time reinforcing this idea that okay, China might occupy Paris, but China is still less advanced in technology, so we should not be occupied by such an inferior other, and by creating a hierarchy. So this I found this again how how can I stop
Yeah.
the
Yeah, you
Yeah,
start. You
perfect.
you stop that. You stop
did
that.
I stop it? Okay.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
this is the reason that I came up with this illustration is because I think these images imply lots of things about the narrative of Yellow Peril. So the point is that the modern minority and the Yellow Peril myth have coexisted in the Western societies, and in that sense, in this regard, Okihiro in 1994, the scholar Okihiro argued that the Yellow Peril and the modern minority actually form a circular relationship that moves in either direction, meaning that when Asian people compared to the other minorities, they were praised as the modern minority that other race minorities have to learn from. But when they're perceived to be outdoing white Europeans, they are treated as a threat, which is the Yellow Peril. So with the pandemic, the Yellow Peril discourse researched especially by the French media. And should I continue or?
Let me just, thank you for that description, and I just want to bring Wujie back in if he wants to comment on anything that you were talking about there. Wujie.
No, I'm okay because I read Julie's wonderful paper, and if you can, Scott, you cannot read it, right? Because can you read it and the Julie's paper in Korean?
No, it's in Korean.
No, I'm
It's
entirely
Korean paper. Yeah.
I'm
Yeah,
entirely illiterate in
that's
Korean.
one
I
of the
rely on my friends.
it's, that's one of the best paper I read recently. Because so
Oh,
she was
sure.
very organized. And that's why I was surprised that she connected modern minority with the yellow peril, and that was very such a nice paper. And I have nothing to add for that, but I want to mention if the audience is of okay, I will share. Okay, so if I can, what can I share the screen? Okay, here. Okay, can you see that?
No.
We're not seeing
Okay,
anything.
okay. Oh, no, that's fine. That's fine. Maybe it made me complicated. So I was just trying to show the one of the picture that Wilhelm II ordered to painter to
Yeah.
write. There's very symbolic picture of the yellow peril that they afraid of the dragon with the Buddha. So
Well,
and if you think about that, what I want to mention is when you talk about yellow peril, this COVID pandemic, is that it's different. There's a little bit of different because in 1985 it was against Japan because they was afraid of Japan rule the other Western country. Now it's China, and very clearly you can see that Chinese science, technology, and their economy is growing up very fast. So a lot of Western country, I mean the political leaders and also a lot of economical leaders, they're afraid of it, but they also cooperate with China, right? Because all the factories in China. So this is, I think, based on this type of yellow peril. So China especially has very strong economical power now, and they're growing so fast. So that's why I want to point out: if you go out and in Western country now, what those Western countries, normal people hate is China, not Korea, not Japan. So yeah, you need to know that. So that's what I want to add up to Julie's comment. Yeah, thank you.
I think that context is important because it also shows how that kind of racism coincides and intertwines with geopolitical struggles, and how also they're operating all the time, but they can be weaponized in times of crisis. And I'm glad that his name hasn't come up yet, but I think we'd be remiss if we didn't talk for just a second about the way Donald Trump used that. And Wu-Jae, just to bring you back in, because you talk about it in your opinion piece, were you surprised to see, maybe Trump doesn't surprise anybody, but he reached directly for that. He didn't, I don't know if he used the term yellow peril. We could go and there's a Twitter database. I wouldn't be surprised if he did, but he used lots of other terms which were just as offensive and just as racist to characterize the virus and to racialize the virus. I don't know if you found that surprising at all, Wu-Jae.
No. Even I have a lot of Chinese friends now. Even this Chinese friend not surprised anymore by Trump because he used the term the Wuhan virus, Chinese virus. He tweeted a lot, right? So, and if you want to feel the responses against Donald Trump by Chinese, and you should come to China. The all age of the Chinese people just laugh at him. So he's not a they think that why USA people elect those very low profile and not qualified politicians as a president, right? But that's democracy too, right? But whatever, Trump make this serious. That's true. COVID-19 itself started this, but Donald Trump, United States president, made this serious. So that's why the normal people like the Caucasian male think that they can kill the Asian woman. How they can get that kind of courage, right? Because even the president do that. Why cannot do that, right? So I don't understand. This is I don't think this is not just cultural problem anymore. This is political problem.
Mm.
It includes the Biden the government too. They need to be very strict and they need to do something for this. Okay, because French, even France, this problem is happening. I was very surprised actually. France, everybody know that France is where the French Revolution happened, and that's the country of the human right. Everybody know it that way. But when I saw that picture from Gilles paper, I was so shocked. I showed it to my wife actually, you know, because that was very shocked. And Gilly told that explained that is the animal, but it's not Gilly. That the right picture is zombie. They're trying to describe the Chinese people as zombie. You know,
Oh,
they are dominating the Paris. Okay, so it reminds me the Charlie Hebdo. I don't know whether my pronunciation is right. Charlie Hebdo
yeah, Charlie Hebdo.
show some yeah, Mohammed, right? The picture and they someone just carrot,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah. Just to,
Yeah. Actually, you go ahead. Yeah.
now just to
I'll
follow up
stop.
quickly, Jinri, to what Wujie was just saying, certainly the politics of Trump and the politics of Macron are different. At least, certainly the rhetorical styles are different. But have there been strong denunciations in France of anti-Asian bias at this time among top political leaders?
I'm sorry, I missed the question. There was a problem with audio. Can you repeat again?
Yeah, has Macron or anyone in the government in France been outspoken about sort of calling out this sort of anti-Asian bias? I was pleased to see that when Biden made a major speech a couple of weeks ago after the murders in Atlanta, Georgia, and he was
Yeah.
pretty unequivocal that this was an issue. And just as Wujie said, he says it's a moral issue, it's a political issue, and we're going to stop it. Now, that was a 180-degree turn in terms of what Trump was doing. How has this been handled in political speech in France?
Well, I would say that when it comes to the exacerbation of racism against Asians, French government showed no action. Of course, it's way better than what Trump has done, but Macron only talked about racism against Asians during his speech for the Lunar New Year, but we were very happy, probably pleased that he mentioned about the problem of racism against Asians. But other than that, he did not do any specific action that could, help Asian community to be less discriminated. And what was also interesting is that even when the violence reached the peak, um, there wasn't really any reaction from the governmental level or from the politician, even those politicians who are very well known for very much engaged in being very much engaged in racism and any sort of racism. They did not mention about racism against Asian. And I would say that this shows clearly the level of awareness of racism against Asians in the French society.
Let me ask you a follow-up question to that. Jinri, let me ask you first. Do you see any evidence that, so what we've been describing is the racism and violence experienced by Asians living in other parts of the world. Have you seen that provoke discussions within, for example, South Korea or within China about racism within those countries? In other words, to look inward and ask those hard questions about human rights and racism at home.
Yeah. Well, what I have read is that I've read several articles talking about racism in South Korea, especially towards Chinese immigrant and migrant workers, and etc. during the COVID-19. But as you just said that what is quite interesting in Korea is that with the pandemic, xenophobia against China and racism against especially Chinese people got worsened. And um, I'm not. I've seen articles talking about it, but I'm not sure that the public opinion is is about let's be careful of not let's be careful of not being racist against others. I'm not very sure about it, so I would like to ask Ujay what he thinks about it.
Okay, so regarding the question, I think when that Georgia the accident happened, the newspapers and the media was reporting a lot, just 1 or 2 days. That was it. So there was no serial discussion about this kind of thing. Maybe partly because the Korean governments are not that much interested in it because they don't know what to do. It happened in the United States. So we are Korea. So we are small country. So what are we gonna do, right? And and personally, I think the discussion about this should happen in the United States, not here, right? A lot of Asian people and Asian governments, when those kinds of accidents happen in the United States, they don't know what to do because United States is a very strong country,
Yep.
and we criticize it in public. Maybe politicians think it's kind of attack to United States, so they don't want to publicize it. And Korean people, they don't discuss about it. You know why? Because we all know that was there long before, but it's just making serious now, right? So we think, and my parents and my friends thinking that that kind of thing will go calm down after COVID-19. That's why we are impatient now. And I'm not telling that this is kind of Asian culture, but I think that people are thinking in that way. All right, that is serious. But United States have guns, always have a racism, right? Trump gone. So there's this reason, right? The Donald Trump gone. So people think, all right, that happened, but it will go down. That's why people are not making this as a like very serious problem. But I think United States government and then a lot of politicians there should discuss about it very seriously, but they will not, I guess. Why? Because this kind of yellow peril and the cultural Asian hate maybe help them to 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 rule the people because they can use it in some way to control people, right? So actually, if you think about Yellow Peril 1895, that was started by politician, right? So
Yep.
in this time, no politicians can do this, right? But I don't know the Western political leaders what they think. Who knows? They might be happy for this in below the behind the curtain. Who knows, right? So I'm thinking that this is not just cultural thing by people, normal people. I think political leaders is very responsible for this, but they are ignoring this. So they need to do something. That's what I want to say. Yeah, thank you.
Just a reminder, you're listening to COVID Calls. I'm talking to Woo-jae Kim and also Jinri Kim today, and we're almost up on time, but I did want to ask one more question. And Woo-jae, I'm going to ask you this first. It's my experience that people who take the time to enter the public sphere and write an opinion piece or write a thesis or go on a podcast and talk about these things, they do them out of a sense of seriousness that there is a possibility for change and that learning is possible. Now, I'm not going to force you to accept that position if that's not how you feel, but I am curious, Woo-jae, what do you think may be possible at this time in terms of addressing, I mean, we're having this conversation, so we're raising these issues, we're confronting them. What do you see as a possibility for change in this moment so that the next time we have a pandemic, a virus isn't once again weaponized as a racist tool?
Okay, so this is like a climate change, the same. So
Hmm.
the normal people like you and me, what we can do, I can do this kind of thing. I'm a writer, so I write, right? I now hope that society can be changed by their writing, but it's rarely happened. So political leaders are responsible for this. Jo- Just Joe Biden, Xi Jinping should meet, right, for world peace. Okay, everybody know now this is very getting serious, right? And when they don't meet, if they don't meet, this kind of yellow peril will not stop. It will continue. Right? So nothing we can do, but we need to hope from Western political leaders and East Asian political leaders do something. But you saw that for 1 year, how the political leaders are stupid on this COVID-19 prevention. They only think about not the people. They think about something else. If you see the vaccine war between EU and England now, this is stupid, right? So world is not idealistically working as we wish, but we need to hope and we need to push them to work together. But Scott, as like you, I don't have any solution, but I keep writing. That's it. All right, thank you.
I'm fascinated by the parallel you drew to climate change there, and what we often, I think it's an important one to think with, because what many people have reached in the last few years is a sort of a climate despair, that all of the work and all of the science, you know, what more evidence do you need? And I find, to Jinri's work, what more evidence do you need that, racism running deep in cultures in the West, but can become vitalized during a crisis with really deadly impact? And yet, as you said, you're a writer and you're still writing. You're a speaker and you're still speaking. Jinri, I'm going to give you this is a heavy topic. If there's anything you want to sort of react to in what Wu-Jie said, or any of your own
Um,
thoughts on this regard in terms of hope and steps for the future.
Well, if I understood correctly, I think Uze kind of put emphasis on the roles of politics to address the problem of racism. But in that regard, I believe more in micro actions and also like the roles of the individuals. So I think the best way to break the cycle of people get stigmatized due to virus is just to raise awareness of racism at the societal level. So I believe that even if the politicians try to do politics with the hate, if the level of awareness about racism is high in a certain society, that they will be more immune to any type of hate, even during the pandemic. And I do actually believe that there is a progress in the society. For example, when it comes to anti-Asian racism in France, when I searched about the public opinion of the illustration that I shared with you guys, the cover of Fluid Glacial, um, I have found almost no article calling it as racist, but rather they call it as freedom of expression à la française, like French way of freedom of expression. But I couldn't really find any article calling it out as racism. But in 2020, when another newspaper, Courrier Picard, when they talked about yellow peril again, linking coronavirus coming from China, there were lots of people who were very indignant about it, and they call it out as racist. So I do believe that there is a change, there is a progress, and we can find hope from it. And in this regard, lastly, I hope that the violence against Asian, that we've witnessed so far these days, will be an occasion for the people to reflect on racism against Asian, which has long been minimized and neglected. Yeah.
Just a reminder, you've been listening to COVID Calls, and you can catch COVID Calls every weekday, 5:30 p.m. Eastern Time, and on Fridays you can catch it at 5:30 p.m. Korea time. Please join me next week. All of next week, we'll be speaking about obituaries in the COVID era, writing about life and death, and I'll be interviewing a number of different journalists, starting with Chris Majerian from the Los Angeles Times on Monday, 5:30 p.m. Eastern Time. So please do join me for that. And I want to thank my guests today, Woo-jae Kim and Jinri Kim. Thanks for the wisdom you've shared and for this really frank and important conversation. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Stay healthy, everyone. I'll see you Monday, 5:30 p.m. Eastern Time.